Alright, so in this video I'm going to show you some implementations on SvelteKit form actions and maybe educate you a little bit more on how SvelteKit is an awesome framework for developing full stack apps. Hold on just one second. I am offering free coaching to those of you who need help in JavaScript development, Flutter development, and most front-end or full-stack JavaScript frameworks. If you're not opposed to receiving some help, message me through Discord at 8dang. I'll be sure to include my tag below, but remember, I might not be able to help with everything, but I'll try my best. But with that out of the way, let's get back into the video. Alright. So first of all, open up the terminal and run npm init svelte, and then we're just gonna hit enter. We're gonna continue, choose skeleton project, choose yes using TypeScript syntax, and choose no additional options. And then after this, we just run npm install, but we're also gonna add a second package, npm install Zod. The reason we install Zod is because we want to streamline our validation for our inputs for the form actions. You'll see in a while that actually validating each input is tedious and time consuming and takes up a lot of code, but Zod allows us to minimize almost 20 lines of code into like 5. So we'll see that in a second. So while we're developing, make sure that npm run dev is happening in the background, or running in the background actually. So then once like this, let's close the terminal, open up the source folder. Right here in the lib folder, let's delete this file. And in the lib folder, let's create a new file called main.css. And here we're just going to include one style for the body. So the reason we take off the margin is because honestly, just for stylistic preference, I just like it better. I just like the margin of the body to be 0. And we're also going to set the height to 100 view height. So look, we set it to display flex because the children will have a display flex so they could take up the full height of the body, as we'll see in 1 second. So then also in the routes folder, let's create a new file called +layout.svelte, and then we're going to create a script with a language set to TS or TypeScript, and we're going to import that main.css file. So we're going to import $lib. We import as $lib because that's the shortcut that SvelteKit allows us to use to access the lib folder from any file inside the routes. So you see main.css. So you see that we don't actually import nothing. We just say import lib/main.css because we want the styles applied to every route inside this app. So then we create a main tag to contain everything, and then we create a section with the class set to content because this is going to be where the children are at, or the actual content for the routes. So we create a slot. The slot basically is where we're going to insert the actual children, or actually the routes. So then we're going to use emit to create a links div with 5 links inside. So the links div with 5 links inside, and let's just make sure to expand each one of these. So in here we're gonna say basic form. So we're gonna create 5 routes to show you 5 implementations of SvelteKit form actions and how they could be used in various ways. So then sending dash data, and right here is gonna be /named forms. Right here is gonna be /enhance /basic auth, and here let's just add the dummy text. Alright, so below the main, let's create a style tag to style this. So in the main, we add a flex grow property, which basically allows us to fill up the full container width of the body because the parent element is a display of flex. So if we add flex grow of 1 right here, you see that we'll grow to the full height of the parent container. So you see we're going to add a padding of 1 rem, and we're going to do display of flex, a flex direction of column to make sure that it's not aligned horizontally, rather vertically. And we're also going to do justify content space between, and then we're going to do a dot links, and it's going to be a display flex, so we actually want it to be spaced out horizontally, and we're going to give it a gap of 1 rem. So basically gap allows us to add spacing between each one of these items. And if we open up localhost, so you see if we open up localhost 5173, on port 5173, you see that we have welcome to SvelteKit, and we have the different links on the bottom, at least. So now let's close this file, and in the plus page.svelte file, let's delete the default markdown, and all we're gonna do is add an h1 that has the text of home, not hame, home, right there. So you see, all we see is home. So now let's close this file, and inside the routes folder, let's create a new folder called basic form, and inside of here, we're gonna create two files, one called page.server.ts. Wait, and right here we're gonna create a plus page.svelte file. So the plus page.server.ts file allows us to run code, or actually TypeScript code, before we actually load the page. So it allows us to run logic like fetching, authentication, and database calls right here from the server. So this plus page.server.ts only runs on the server, and it basically allows us to pass data from the server into this plus page.svelte file, and allows us to dynamically render pages according to the data from the server. So then right here, so in the plus page.svelte file, all we're gonna do is add an h1 that says basic form, and then we're gonna do a form with the method set to post. And the reason we're gonna remove the action is because by default, if we add the default action, like if we had no action, that means that it's just gonna route directly to the default action that we're gonna create right here in the plus page.server.ts. So by definition, the form actions have to be on the server because they can only run on the. So we'll see that in 1 second. So let's create three inputs, one with the name of name and placeholder of name. Let's copy this down 3 times. We're not gonna actually do anything with this data in this form. We're just gonna see how to transfer data from the client to the server using form action. So for the form, we don't actually need to specify any special button or a submitter. We could just add a default button in the bottom that if we click, it just submits the form. So you see that if we go to basic form right here, you see h1 and you see 3 text inputs, and right now they won't really do nothing. They will just map to an error. You see, wait, you see, post method doesn't exist. So let's go back, basic form, right there. So to actually have form actions, we have to include this export const. We have to include this actions object right here in the plus page.server.ts. It cannot be in the plus server.ts. It has to be in the plus page.server.ts. So you can name your actions, like your form actions, but you could also go with the default, which usually is good because most pages only have one form action, but later on we'll see why the use of a named action is actually really good. So then we're going to do const form data, and to get access to the different inputs like the text, email, and password, we're going to have to access the request dot form data, and we're going to have to await. So you see, this parses the actual form data from the request and gives it back to us in the form data structure. So you see, it's a form data. So we're just going to console.log form data.get name. So right now we're just seeing how the data transfer comes from this client right here from this form into this action. So we just want to console.log the name. So right here, let's just add test as the name, submit form, and it should return good, and it should console.log the name that we have inside of this console, not inside of the browser console, just in the terminal, because this only runs on the server. So then we could access the different properties of the form using this, but we could also access the different properties like so. So we create a form data object, and it's equal to object dot from entries form data. So by default, the form data structure is an entry, is an extension of entries, and we could just console log form data object. So this basically gives us back one item at a time, but this gives us the whole form data as a whole. So you see, now if I try this out, test at email.com, test, And you see, we get back not just test that we come from here, but we also get back the full object of the name, email, and password. So now we could also throw redirects. We could also redirect the user if we want to. So we could do a 303 to slash, make sure import redirect. And right here, this function permanently redirects us to the home. If we save and we fill out this form with some valid data, you see we're redirected back to the home page. So now let's close these files. So right here in the routes folder, let's create a new folder called sending data. And here let's create two files, one called plus page.svelte and the other one called plus page.server.ts. And right here, for this example, we're not just going to be sending data from the client to the form data, to the form action, but we're also going to be sending data from the server back to the client. So let's see how you do that. So before we do anything, let's create a script tag and set this to the language property set to TS. And we're going to do an export let form is equal to action data. Okay? So to get this autocomplete, just go over to the terminal and have npm run dev running, and it'll autocomplete these types for you. But the cool thing about this is that this form object allows us to access the data sent to us by the different forms. So what do I mean by that? Let's go out here and let's create a h1, obviously, sending data. And right here, we're going to create a form with the method of post. Always remember, always set the method of post when you're working with form actions. All right. So then we're going to do input, type text, name is equal to name, placeholder, name. Let's not actually include an email form. Let's just include just the name and password. And then let's create a button that says submit form. So now, if we go over to sending data page, you see that we have a form. And if we try to submit something, you see that we get a 405. So let's go over here and let's create an actions data type, or no, an actions object. So right here, let's create the default action. And the reason, again, just as a refresher, the reason we say default is because we don't include any actions right here. But in the next example, I'm going to show you how to actually use names in your actions so you can have different actions for the same route. All right. So then we're going to access the request, obviously, because we want to access the form data. But we say const form data is equal to object dot from entries await request. So you see in the previous one, we had two options. One, getting each item individually, or we could just pass in this object dot from entries, and pass in the form data and just validate it like that. So you see right now, return invalid name. Let's make sure I add colon right here, and let's say data is equal to form. And let's stop right there, right? We could have it like this, but let's just set this to true. If true, we're gonna return it. So every time we do this, we're gonna return, okay? So actually, let's just remove this because that's nonsensical. So right here, we're getting the form data and we're returning, okay? This is the important part. You always return, okay? So we can return data, or we can return errors that we want. We could return whatever we want. And you can see that in the action data, if we hover over it and you have proper TypeScript syntax highlighting, you can see that we have access to this error and also the data object, which is very important. So right here, all we're going to do is include a value property. So basically, by default, if there is a data.name, so if there is data to be used, we use it inside the values, or we just add an empty array. But also below the button, we're gonna add an as if block. So basically this conditionally renders this component that's inside. So if there is an error, we display that error. So right here, you see that if we just send test and no password, we get the test back and it doesn't automatically delete it, and we also get the error back. We get the error back and it's server-side rendered. So if, well, it doesn't really show up in the page source, but it is server-side rendered. So now let's close this file because it's already good. But now let's run some custom logic. So let's go back to the state that we were right here, where we validated the form data.name, but we could also catch all these errors in a try catch block. So try catch error. So now the interesting part is that in this try catch block, we could run logic, and then we could, inside this try catch block, we could just throw errors and catch them and return custom messages that we could send back to the user. So let's see how that looks like. So now let's validate to see if the form password is actually valid. So we gotta say form password and also form password, invalid password. And now let's add another one. So if the form data dot password dot length is less than 8, we throw new error saying password must be at least 8 characters. And if we pass all the validation, we're just gonna say console.log form data. So instead of return, so right here in the catch block, we're gonna return what is called a fail. So we'll see right now. If the error is an instance of error, return fail. And right now, semantically, the return and fail are the same thing. But in the future, when we get into enhancements, you'll see in the later sections of this video that this fail is going to be very crucial for differentiating whether a message sent by the server is an error or not. So then let's pass in custom data. Let's make sure to import fail first of all. So here we're going to say error is equal to error dot message, and also message, and also data is equal to form data. So let's make sure error, and let's copy this down. So if it's not an instance of error, we just say some dummy text, some random text that just says sample text. So if we pass all the validation and we console.log, that means we just throw redirect. So this is the happy path. So we just throw redirect with a code of 303, port it. So you see that we get the data, we validate it, we log it, and if there is any errors, we throw. So let's see how that looks like. So if we don't send any name at all, we submit form, invalid name. So let's add a valid name, we submit form, invalid password. You see that we maintain the same input for the name input. But now let's say we input a test, we input a password with the value of test, so it's below the 8 character requirement. So we submit form, you see we get back the error passed in as the correct error. Now if we pass in 8 characters at least, submit form, you see we're redirected back. So now let's close these files, and right here let's create a new folder called named form. So in this section, we're actually going to get into how to name and also how to differentiate different forms for different form actions. So how to specify whether, for example, if you have 2 form actions, one login, one sign up, how do you tell one form to send its data to the sign up, and how do you tell another form to send its data to the login form? How do you do that? Let's see how to do that. Inside the name forms folder, let's create 2 files, one called the page.svelte and the other one called plus page.server.ts. As usual, we go first into the plus page.svelte, and just like before, we're going to create a script with the lang property set to ts. So then we're going to export let form, we can actually access the data from the server. So say action data. So here let's add an header element with the content set to named forms. So below we're gonna add a form with the method of post with the action. Remember, before we were just adding no action because by default we set the form action to the default action. Forms, remember, you see how the route is saying named forms? Always specify the same route that this form is placed into. You always specify the same route that the action is set into, not that the form is set into, that the action is set into. For example, if this action is set into, for example, a login page that is different from this page, we don't set it to slash named forms, we set it to slash login, for example. So we set the action to name forms because the form action is going to be inside the name forms, and we add question mark slash sign up. Just as an explanation, this slash allows us to pass data into URLs. So it allows us to add custom data into URLs that aren't routes. For example, if I want to, I don't know, add an index to a URL, I could just say question mark indexes. But what SvelteKit does is it takes this standard in the web and in URLs in general, and it says, look, these are called search queries, search parameters, my bad. So the search parameters are usually set for minor details like indexes and users and whatever. It uses it to route the form to the specific action that it needs to. For example, if I have a create form and I map this form to the sign up, it won't send it to the create form. It'll send it to the sign up form. So this is how it differentiates. So let's get into the content. So let's create a h2 saying sign up. And let's create 3 inputs. So now it's gonna start bringing up errors, but just ignore these for a second because we're gonna develop the actual form action, so the errors are gonna pass away. But below these, let's create a button and I say sign up. Okay, we don't need to add any extra labels or nothing. To get a button inside a form, directly inside a form, it'll submit the form. Simple as that. Easy, simple. I like it. So let's create an if block to display the error. So I know I'm adding all these arbitrary variables from the form action that aren't actually created yet, but in a second we'll create the form action and it'll all be cleared up. Just follow along with my. So right here, let's have this form and let's copy it down one time. And here, instead of to slash sign up, we say slash login. Okay. And here, let's rename this to login. So in here, we remove this input and it's only going to be email. So here it's going to be login, and if the error is login. Oh, right here, let's make sure to rename these to login. Make sure they're mapped to login and not sign up. So we could actually close this file now. So as usual, let's export constant actions is equal to sign up, async, request, and I'll get into what these mean in a second. Hold up. So you see, we create the async function, but instead of default, we say the name. So you remember how in the forms we created question mark slash sign up? The question mark slash sign up maps to this function. Okay? So we're going to say const form data is equal to object dot from entries await request dot form data. So let's create a try catch block. So in here, we're going to actually validate the actual form. So in the sending data, we could just copy and paste most of this logic, so we don't have to be typing so much. Go right here, and this is going to be a throw new error So let's copy down this name and say email. So you see we validate the input, and then we just console.log form data. So inside this catch block, we could literally just go back here, come in here, copy paste this. No, copy this, paste this, and instead of data, wait, and instead of data, we're gonna say sign up. Right here, instead of error, we're gonna rename this to message. And in both of these fail blocks, we say error is equal to sign up. And then we're just gonna throw redirect all if all the conditions are valid. We're gonna throw redirect 303 to slash. So now let's test out this form. So you see, if you go over here, we go to named forms. And let's not submit anything to the login page. Let's just submit something to the sign up page. So test at email.com. So you see password must be at least 8 characters in length. And it sends us right back to the home page as usual. So now let's have all of this right here, and let's copy paste this form, rename this new form to login, and let's remove the validation for the name. And let's say the error is login, and let's say the data doesn't go to something called sign up. Let's say it goes to login. So if you recall, we sent the data, and we sent different data fundamentally than in the login data, than the login form. So you see, we say that the error is sign up instead of login. And if we go back to the plus page.svelte, and if we hover over this, wait, to get very good type checking, I suggest everyone that is looking to do Svelte form actions to look at their returns and just mark them as constants. So we say as const right there. So now if we go here to the plus page.svelte file inside the name forms, and if we hover over action data, you can see that we have incredible IntelliSense. We have the error specified specifically to the sign up page. We have the message set to string, and we have the sign up object. And if we do have a login error, we have the error set to login and the message to string, obviously. And we also have a login object. So now you see that if, for example, I purposely send empty data to login form, invalid email, but it pops up under the login form. But if I send invalid data to the sign up form, it sends the error to the sign up form. Isn't this awesome that you could specify which error goes where from the form? So let's just test it out. Let's test out this login form. Test at email.com. Test. You see, I'm redirected back home and it's valid. So now inside the routes folder, let's create a new folder called enhance. And inside of this folder, let's create two files called pluspage.svelte and the other one called pluspage.server.ts. For this whole tutorial, we've been just sending the data as an HTTP request and reloading the HTML every time we sent a request. So basically, we were doing most of the logic of rendering the HTML custom in the server. But with use enhance, it allows us to run some extra logic on the client and allows us to bypass this extra refresh that is honestly redundant. It speeds up performance. It makes better experiences for user, and honestly, it makes better experience for developers because you are able to control a lot of the logic inside of your JavaScript code, but it doesn't rely on JavaScript code in the browser. That's what I had to say. In the browser, it doesn't rely on the browser 100%. If you don't need to, you don't have to, but it's a great tool. So let's see what I'm talking about. Enhance is basically a function that you attach to your forms to allow it extra magic. I'm going to be honest. It's magic. Completely magic. So right here, we're going to say a script with the lang property set to TS. And we're going to do export let form is equal to is a type of action data. So here, let's just create a header. Let's create a header with enhancing your forms. So now let's go back here and let's go to sending data and let's just copy the form. So I know I'm copying pasting a lot, but it's just to make a point. I'm not going to write out the whole code word for word, just typing it out. I want to get to the point. So you see, traditionally, you would just send method of post, and inside the enhance, I think it's literally just this action right here. Let's just copy paste this. Let's copy paste this into here. And this is going to be like this. So now let's close this file. This is basically all the logic I need, and it's not really much to it because this is going to be an example form. Most of the magic is going to be happening on the client because using hands is fundamentally a client function. But what it is complete magic. I'll show you right now. You could literally just stick it into your functions and it'll just work. Let me show you. Let me show you something. You remember how this form, let's go to sending data. You remember how you would need to refresh? You see that? You see how it refreshes? Let's progressively enhance. Exact same form, just with a few characters as the difference. Instantly. It is no refresh, no nothing, and it even takes care of the redirects for you. Submit form, and it does client side redirects. It doesn't redirect you using the standard fetch API or whatever. It doesn't redirect you like that. It redirects you like natively inside the browser. It's incredible. And now, not just most of the time, you will not need any more than this. Most of the time, you won't need any more than this. Most of the time, you will just be sending some data and you'll just need the performance boost. Honestly, the performance boost is crazy. And not just that, this creates not just a valid form for client, for just not just a better experience for clients, but a better experience for people who don't have that strong of a internet connection and can't just reload your web pages every time you create a fetch. And for the people who want to interact with your website and don't have JavaScript enabled, this form still works. You know that, right? Look, let me show you. Let's go to inspect. Let's go to settings and let's turn off JavaScript. So you see test, whatever. Password, it's amazing. And look, if you want custom behavior, it's easy. Completely easy. You just add this function and let's say request. It's so easy. You could let me show you. We're gonna log the request object. And in the console, let's just send this data. Let's see. We have an action, which is basically just the URL of where we're gonna go. A cancel function, which allows us to cancel the form. A controller, which basically just allows us to cancel it. It's the same thing as cancel, but has some extra features. The data, these two are deprecated. Form data and form element are basically these two. Form data allows us to see the data that's going to be passed from the form into our form action. And submitter allows us to have a reference to the button or the element that submits the form. Where the magic comes from is that we could change the form data. So we could append some extra properties, whatever. This could be used like in many ways, right? So remember how we would log every time we would make a request to the form action? Wait, let's see this right here. Oh wait, let's make sure to turn this into valid, right? You see, we get access from the server into the property that we appended. We could change the request inside the use enhance. It's easy. It's completely easy. Now let's close this terminal. We could cancel if we need to. This also allows us to validate our forms on the client side without needing to request the without needing to send requests, improving the performance by tenfold. So you see that if we submit the form, nothing happens. Nothing. Now, let's look at where the real magic comes from. The result. Let's just log it just to see what this is. Let's just see. Let's see. Test, test, submit the form. You see we have action, URL, yada yada, right? But there's a function in here. There's two variables that are very special. You remember how I told you that when you would throw errors, remember to always wrap them in fail? That comes off right here. You can see that if it's a failure or not. You can see if it's a redirect. You could get access to the data. It's amazing. And now this update keyword is the best. Let me show you. Update. No, actually, result dot update. So basically, reset basically means if we want to reset the actual web page, not the web page, the loading functions of this web page. So for example, if we would just do that, right? It's a if for example we would send a text message, and we want the scroll view to update. That's perfect. It's literally one line of code and it's simple. The best part about this is not the features, it's the simplicity. It allows us to send data back and forth from the server to client in a performant way, in the simplest way possible. I could not imagine something simpler. So invalidate all, true. So this basically, oh wait, reset resets the function. Invalidate all invalidates all the loading functions and makes them load again. For example, if I would take these values away, let's just take these. Oh, reset only resets if it's a successful submission, and invalidate all just calls invalidate all after that, right? And just as a recap, or as like an additional note, we could get access to this result. But the good thing about this is that we could do switch statements or if statements to check whether the result is a type of, for example, a failure or an error or redirect or successful. You can see that if we do this, there's type narrowing. It's everything about use enhance is amazing, and I hope you guys find the love I have for this. Honestly, it's so. Now for the final, I just want to drill some of these points home, and before we get into it, let's just create an auth.ts file. We're gonna create simple authentication. So basically, do not use this authentication in your real app. Okay, do not. Okay, you have to have encryption. You have to have data managed correctly. So let's create a user type with an email and a password. And let's create a users map. So let users is equal to new map and a string and user. And then let's create three functions. One function is user with same email. So basically checks if there's a user with duplicate emails, or at least if there's a user that's already using the email that you want to create the user with. So let's see how we'll implement this. So we'll get access to the users array is equal to array dot from users dot values, and then we're going to loop over this user of users array. So now if user dot email is equal to email, we're just going to return true. So you can see that if none of them have the same email, we're not going to return anything in the for loop. So we're going to exit out of this, and so we loop over this. So we loop over this array. We check if it's true, and if it's not, the for loop will not return anything, and we'll just return false by default. So then let's export a function called create user with the user set to user. And then we're going to say if, so we're going to check if the user has, if a user is already using the email, user.email. We're going to say throw new error. We're going to say email is already in use. Const ID is equal to crypto.random UID. And then we're going to say users.set ID user. So we're going to map the ID to the user, and then we're just going to return the ID so they can set the cookie in the form action. So we're going to say users.set. So now below this, let's create another function called get user by email password. Let's make sure to take this out. And it's going to take in two parameters, an email, which is going to be a string, and a password, which is also going to be a string. So this basically is a sign up form, if you want to call it that, and this is a login form if you. But right here, let's set a default outcome, so we're going to return undefined if we don't find anything. And then we're going to get the keys, not the values. We're going to get the keys of the map. So if you took any data structures course, which it doesn't really matter, if you took any data structure course, you would see that map, if you got the keys, you would see it's just a bunch of strings. If you set it to strings, it's the data structure that you set in the beginning, and you could use it to map and get items from it. So we're basically going to loop over the keys that the users have. So basically all the IDs, and then we're going to for loop them. So we're going to say key of user array, and then we're going to say const user is equal to users dot get key. So we're going to get the user, and we're going to check if the user exists. So if the user doesn't exist, we just break out of the loop. And if user.email is equal to email and user.password is equal to password. So basically, if the data correlates, we're going to return key. And if we don't find a user with the same email or password, we're just going to return undefined. Perfect. Oh, and I forgot to make one function right here below the get user. And we're going to get an ID. And we're just going to return users dot get. So now we could close this file. And in the routes folder, let's create a new folder called basic auth. And inside of this folder, let's create a plus page.svelte file. And also a plus page.server.ts file. So let's go over to GitHub. This GitHub link in the link in the description, so you could find it and find this. If you want to duplicate it and just implement your own thing on it, basically extend it. I suggest you guys extend it if you guys need to. But let's just copy this and let's paste it into here. So I'll go step by step through here. I'm not going to copy paste and just ignore it. But basically, we get the data, right? And in the plus page.server.ts, we'll create a load function that tells us if we're authenticated or not, and it returns us a user, right? So then we create, if we don't have a use it, if we do have, if we are authenticated, we display an H1, a paragraph, and a form that allows us to log out. But if we aren't, it looks like basic auth, two forms, one sign up, one login. And obviously these have their own errors, and these are implemented with use enhance. So you see that use enhance is super useful. You'll see that it works for everything, even for even complicated stuff like this. You can just stick it on here and it'll work. Trust me. I apologize if I wasn't able to explain the basic authentication, but I feel like this isn't really much of an important part of the video. It's the most important part of the video is actually the foundation of which the SvelteKit form actions is set. And I want you guys to have an amazing foundation because this is honestly one of the most killer features of SvelteKit. So let's go through here. I'm not going to go line by line, but let's review this code. Okay. Disclaimer, do not use this authentication logic at all. Please do not. All right. So you remember in the beginning how I downloaded this package called Zod. Basically, it allows us to construct schemas. Schemas, if you don't know what that means, is predetermined types, basically like types, right? But it allows us to validate these types that we create and allows us to validate objects according to these schemas. So basically, we create one for the login and one for the sign up, and this isn't the schema for the return data. This is more like a schema for the form data that we're getting in. Okay. So in this load function, if you guys don't know load functions allows us to run some code before this page gets rendered. And you see we're seeing if the ID exists, and if it does, we're gonna get the user, and if the user doesn't exist, we just return, and if it does, we return it, and we do not include the password. This is just a safe practice. I do not want you guys to write insecure code like that, please. And in the actions, we have three actions. One, log out, which just deletes the ID, literally. The second one is a sign up, which is just gets the form data, parses it according to the sign up schema, creates a user, sets the cookie. So you see that in the form actions, we can set cookies. And these cookies can persist through re-renders and through like through page sessions, right? And same with the login. Instead of creating a user, we just get user by email and password, and if it doesn't exist, we just throw new error and we just return authenticate is equal to true. So now let's test this out. We're gonna create a test. Oh wait, let's make sure to send this email correctly. You see, string must contain at least 8 characters. You see, this is automatically Zod's errors, which is honestly is good enough. I don't see any problem with it. You see that it's because of the password. So you see right there, and we're logged in. We could even refresh. Welcome back test. Your email, test@email.com. You see we could log out, and you see we created this, right? But let's say we want to create, let's say we're a hacker and we want to create another account with the same email. Wait, let's copy this email. Let's log out. You see email is already in use. But now if I try to log in using this email and the same password, it logs us in and we could refresh and it persists. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys found value in here. I hope you guys find the love that I do for this amazing feature that SvelteKit has. And honestly, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you guys.